This Photography News podcast is sponsored by MPB. There's never been a better time to make good use of your kit, inspire others, make some extra cash, and make a difference. Sell your used kit today at mpb.com/sell and let someone else love it as much as you have. In this episode of the Photography News podcast, Kingsley buries the ghost of Christmas presents, Will has a star fail, and Roger speaks fondly of a tractor. Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Photography News podcast, the very last one for 2020. And hey, what a great year it's been. My name is Roger Payne and I'm the editorial director at Photography News. And in light of the fact that Christmas is just a few days away, I thought I'd introduce my colleagues according to how likely they are to have completed their Christmas shopping. So I'll start with who I think is probably going to have got his Christmas shopping done first. Editor of Photography News, Mr. Will Chang. Hi, Will.
Yay. Hi, Raj. Hi, Kingsley. How are we doing?
And how is the Christmas shopping going, Will?
As you so rightly suspected, I'm all done. Wrapped up and everything.
Fantastic.
I'm good to go. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, lovely to have you along. And the person less likely to have completed his Christmas shopping already, contributing editor, Mr. Kingsley Singleton. Hi, Kingsley.
Hi. Yeah, you're right. I haven't done my Christmas shopping.
I'm one of those. Started it.
Well, I've done some. I'm one of those people that likes the. I find a certain thrill in the look of pity that you get from shop staff when you're going around at like 5:30 on Christmas Eve. I get that really charges me up for Christmas. I have bought some stuff. I mean, I bought myself a new L bracket the other day, but I might wrap that up and give it to myself.
Well, lovely to have you both on board. And we'll start as usual, which is a quick chat about what we've been photographing quite recently. And as we were just discussing before we started recording, it seems like we all managed to achieve what we set ourselves, the task that we set ourselves a couple of podcasts ago, which was to get out and shoot a star trail. Now, not wanting to blow my own trumpet, but I was actually the only person to do this the first time round. Kingsley tried to make do with a traffic trail. But Kingsley, I believe that you have actually this time managed to get out and do the job properly. Is that right? Tell us a little bit about your star trail.
Yeah, we had a few nights of clear skies here, and so obviously I left it to the last possible night of those clear skies while the clouds were rolling in from the east. But I did get one. I'll hang on. I'll share my screen with you there. Hang on.
Oh, this is good for audio.
Can you see that?
Yeah. Can you describe what we're looking at?
It's just, I mean, it's just a regular shot of the Namibian desert with a star trail. I'll share my actual star trail with you.
Yeah, pretty sure there's some copyright issues with that particular one.
There we go.
Ooh, I definitely prefer the first one.
Yeah, so do I.
Nice though. That's nice.
But this has got a more Lincolnshire kind of flavour to it, hasn't it?
Was that taken, Kingsley, with your standard lens, i.e. your 300mm?
That was taken. Do you know what? I cannot remember it was about 150mm on a 24-200.
Oh, it's a wide angle for you then.
It's pretty wide angle, yeah. But actually, like I said last time, there's a sort of a benefit to this in that the longer you shoot focal length wise, the faster the stars will appear to track across the frame, so you get easier trails. It's one of those things. I really haven't done it that much, and because I tend to prefer shots of sort of static starry skies in landscapes and stuff. But yeah, like I said, I went out, I did it. I had a try, I had an experiment, and I enjoyed it. And the thing that I enjoyed the most was probably actually getting out there and doing it.
Absolutely. And the tree, you've basically got a tree there in the foreground which is lit up. Now, is that lit up by flood lighting, or is that lit up by a flash gun, or how did you like that bit of it?
You've forgotten who I am, Raj. That's just a tree that's visible from my back garden and some street lighting or something.
Right, okay.
But I made the best of it. I tried to make the best of it.
Well, good for you. It's a nice shot. It's a nice shot. And what was sort of how many exposures did that comprise, and what was your technique to get that?
I can't remember how many exposures, but it covered about 10 minutes. Or possibly even less. I'll check at some point. But it's certainly kind of like it definitely shows that you can kind of get a lot more movement from a longer focal length, I think.
So what about you, Will? Did you manage to get out and do one?
Well, I did do a star trial the other day, which wasn't that successful. I did try again last night. Now, just to explain, tonight's the 21st of December, so this is the night of the Great Conjunction, and of course it's also the winter solstice. So the good news is, by the way, that days are going to get longer now by 3 seconds a day. So we can get more like 3 seconds worth a day from now on. But I went out to see the Great Conjunction last night, the first time we've seen it for 800 years. And this is where Saturn and Jupiter appear to be very, very close together. So they appear to be one star.
Will, can I just jump in and ask, so 800 years ago, where were you when you saw it last time?
I had my telescope even then. No problem. In my DeLorean, it wasn't a problem. A telescope in the back. And I went up the local hill last night to have a look at the Jupiter and Saturn, and it was wonderful. I took a spotting scope with me. So what I did was I double tasked. I had the spotting scope on one pod so I could watch Jupiter and Saturn set. And on another tripod with the Z7 and a 14 to 24 millimeter lens on, I set the camera to do 300 exposures for a star trail for this podcast. So I tried quite hard at it. Anyway, the long and the short of it is, as you can imagine, 300 exposures of 6 seconds each. It took a while. Jupiter and Saturn had set by the time I finished. And then when I got back home and looked at the pictures, for some reason, do not know why this happened, but some were sharp and some weren't. The camera wasn't touched. The wind wasn't that strong. There was no autofocus in play. But some are clearly out of focus, not shake, but out of focus, and some are fine. So out of 300 exposures, I was going to stack them to make a star trail, but basically it's a big fail, Raj. I really tried last night.
So are they intermittently out of focus, or have you just got a huge batch that at one point it goes from being sharp to being all out of focus?
To be fair, I've now deleted them because I was so annoyed last night. But it's just in the start sharp, because obviously I knew it was sharp, because that's why I focused up. And then it drifted off, and at some point it did drift back.
Right.
And I didn't look at every raw because it was just pointless, because I knew that it was a complete failure. So I can't actually tell you how many were out of focus, but enough were. But I don't understand it. There should be no movement within the camera. The lens shouldn't have moved. The autofocus shouldn't have kicked in. But something happened, and I don't know what. So I'm going to have to check that again and try it again.
I'd just blame 2020. It wouldn't be sort of beyond the realms of possibility, would it, if 2020 itself went out of focus for several minutes?
Yeah, the mutating virus. That's what I blame.
Well, that sounds like a bit of a head scratcher, Will. I mean, no idea why that happened, especially because when I shoot star trails, and I did shoot another one, which I know I sent round to you guys. I shot mine, obviously manual focus. I just let the camera run, really. Just let the camera run for about 300 exposures, combine them using star stacks. Quite really happy with the result, actually. As I think I mentioned before, I lived not far from Stansted Airport, and there were a couple of planes tracking across the sky as part of my star trail, which looked quite nice. So I'll share that on Instagram, as I'm sure both Will and Kingsley will as well. So I mean, I don't know whether you chaps have had time to shoot anything else, or has that been pretty much the sum total of what you've been able to capture? Kingsley?
I'd say that's been about it. Yeah, I mean, I kind of, there was some other stuff I took from it, was things like how I never really realised that you could get star trails quite easily in more sort of urban areas than, because like I say, I'm sort of obsessed with these ultra starry static skies where you need sort of almost no light pollution and these sort of very different settings. But I was kind of empowered in a way by like the idea that you can shoot them in probably not in the middle of London or the middle of a city or something. You might get one or two stars, but then also discovering things like, you know, the how you set up your ISO, and therefore the kind of the sensitivity kind of controls, you know, obviously how many stars are visible and therefore how busy the trails are. So, you know, you can either have loads and loads of trails, or you can have just like a few stars that are obvious, and like that kind of all works in to your composition, I suppose. I mean, yeah, no, I hadn't really shot much else. I spent a lot of time thinking about it, clearly.
Well, I think I would definitely recommend for people to get out and do it. I mean, I'm on the basis of my last trail, I definitely want to shoot some more, but I actually want to try and get some foreground interest in my images. So I need to dig out the hot shoe flash so I can put something in the foreground and then light that up.
Do you know what? And something else I discovered: a 30-second exposure on my Nikon is actually 32 seconds.
Right. How did you discover that?
Well, because it's to do with how you set up your intervalometer and how the kind of the interval that you need between shots and how, because I mean a lot of Nikon cameras have got a built-in intervalometer, and a lot of people might alternatively use an intervalometer that's on a cable release kind of thing. But so I was looking into it, and people were saying, well, you need to leave sort of like plus 1 second over the exposure time, basically. But this one particular person's article that I read said that but check what your exposure time is, because you might discover that your 30-second exposure is actually 32 seconds, and like it makes complete sense, doesn't it? Because it's like 216. It's like you're talking about you're doubling. Will, you'll be able to talk me through this. Why isn't a 30-second exposure 30 seconds?
To be honest, I haven't heard that one before. I'm aware of the intervalometer issue, because that's what I had to do as well. That's what I got wrong the first time, and it's not really clear until you do it that you have to allow it longer than the actual exposure time.
In that case,
if you've got time 30-second exposure, I don't know why it's 32 and not 30.
Because like a 15th of a second, 15 seconds isn't 15 seconds, it's 16 seconds. You're doubling, aren't you? So I don't know why they call it 30 seconds, probably just because it looks better. Maybe we should cut all this out until we can confirm it.
I'm really intrigued by this. I'm actually going to go and dig out my camera and see whether my 20-second exposure, which is what I've been using, is actually 20 seconds or not.
Yeah, time it.
Somebody from a camera manufacturer explain what's going on, or is Kingsley's camera just not working properly? Well, we will no doubt find out in due course. If you do get out and shoot a star trail or any kind of trail over the Christmas and New Year periods, which we'd heartily recommend you do, the settings that I use on my camera doesn't have to be the same for you, but I use a 35mm lens, f2.8, ISO 200, 20-second exposure at f2.8, and then just stack them up. That's my starting point. It seems to be a pretty decent starting point, unless of course your Kingsley shoots with a 300mm. So there we go. Give it a go and send the pictures to us. Share the images with us. The best way to do that is on social media, and we are on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And the handle for all those is the same. It's at PhotoNewsPN. This Photography News podcast is sponsored by MPB. Use their free online valuation tool to instantly find out exactly how much your gear is worth. Get super fast payments straight into your bank account, and if you change your mind at any point up until you get paid, they'll ship it back for free. So, given that it is coming to the end of 2020, we thought that it'd be a good time to do a bit of a look back. Don't worry, it's not going to be a political look back at the 2020. It's going to be more of a conversation just about what we think we've achieved in the year from a photographic perspective, what we've learnt, and a little bit about the sort of images that we're happiest with. So, Will, why don't you start? I know you've not been particularly prolific photographically this year as you might normally, but give us an idea. I mean, on a normal year, how many pictures do you reckon you might take in a normal year?
It's kind of difficult to break down because there's a lot of testing that I do as well, so as well as my own pictures. But let's say typically my Lightroom catalogue will be between 30 and 40,000 pictures a year. But the fact is, actually this year, despite the fact it's been a challenging year photographically, my numbers are still there. Because I've shot literally this year over 10,000 pictures of sunsets, which is bonkers, absolutely bonkers. When I say sunsets, I group within that cloud formations and clouds and twilight and all the rest of it. But I've got a whole catalogue dedicated to sunsets and clouds. Because I spent a lot of time walking up the local hill because I couldn't go anywhere else, photographing sunsets. So in terms of numbers, Raj, they're well up. But in terms of subject matter, I have this year rediscovered the macro lens, as I'm sure an awful lot of people have. So flowers, water droplets, oil patterns on water, all that sort of thing. I spent a lot of time in the summer shooting. And I did have one project as well, which was rather fun. And that was my self-portrait project, where I tried every day during lockdown to do a self-portrait. Mm-hmm. And some were successful, some were challenging, some are still I'm still working on. But I really quite enjoyed that. Using myself as a model, which is not obviously not the best subject in the world. But that was a challenge, photographing yourself when you're on your own and framing yourself up and lighting yourself and focusing. But in terms of photography, yeah, absolutely. 2020, after February, because I did have one trip away in February, and then we had lockdown in late March. Yeah, I haven't done a lot in terms of, well, compared to what I normally do in a year, and certainly in terms of mileage around this country. I often drive around a lot taking pictures, but this year I just haven't.
What about you, Kingsley? What's your normal imaging output in a year, and how does it compare to what you've shot this year?
I genuinely haven't got a clue. I don't feel like I've done like a pretty sort of similar to Will, in that I think that there's been this kind of, because one of the positive things that's come out of this year is the amount of sort of support people have given each other, and that could be as simple as people giving each other projects and feedback on pictures and things like that. And so like I because of all that stuff, I don't really feel like I've done a lot less. And we've shared kind of projects, and obviously we did that self-portrait thing, didn't we? Months and months and months ago. But I think that so in terms of the number of shots, I'm not sure it would be that different. If I was to pick favorite things that I've done this year, it's definitely been those windows of opportunity I've had to get out and do proper landscapes, which was sort of between July and September or something. Managed to get to Devon a few times, got to the peaks, had a great time in the peaks, actually kind of discovering some new places there. And in a way, you walk around and you sort of thank your lucky stars that you're actually out and doing something like that, I think.
Yeah, it's quite interesting what you say there about how people have supported one another, and not wanting to particularly publicly compliment the pair of you, but actually I think that the little projects that we've kind of set ourselves as part of the process of this podcast has actually kind of helped me get out and take pictures. And I guess that's probably something for everybody to learn to, drop into, if this lockdown sort of seems to continue, as now that we've had the tier 4 introduced, the opportunity to just drop into forums and get sort of ideas from fellow photographers seems to be quite a good one. So if you get to a point where you're kind of losing your direction or not particularly motivated to go out and photograph something, then that seems to be a good way to go. I mean, definitely from my own perspective, I think as we talked a few months ago on the podcast, I was really struggling with my picture taking. My picture taking was without doubt this year at an all-time low. And then it was actually sort of at the end of summer when I thought I really need to get out and do more stuff and take a camera with me all the time. And then when we had the little Star Trails thing and the going out, it definitely motivated me to get out and shoot more.
I definitely think that's kind of part, and I know we've said this before, but like it is like process. The process of it is at least 50% of it, I think. The going out there, the doing, the visual problem solving, and even like being in the elements. And like, I mean, I've started doing things like making sure that I take a flask of tea with me when I go on my landscape jaunts, and that actually becomes a little bit more about just sitting there and enjoying the landscape. So you try to do both and you get a bit more out of it that way.
That's a very good point, Kingsley, about being prepared. I mean, just to relate back to my Star Trail attempt last night, I took a hippie of vodka up with me to keep myself warm.
Wait a minute, have we just discovered why half of them went out of focus?
No, well, the thing was, I was looking out of a telescope, Raj, most of the time. The camera's doing its own thing, so you can't blame the vodka for that. But certainly being prepared was a good idea. And actually, we talked about the elements. I mean, I did 1 or 2 sunsets or stormy days when I've got some fantastic clouds. And, often you drive around oblivious to what's happening in the sky, because you try and get from A to B or coming home from work. But I spent so much time looking at the sky this year. And there's these wonderful, wonderful cloud formations on some stormy days. And I made a vow now that whenever we've got a forecast of, inclement weather, I'm just going to make an effort, even just getting up to the local hill and standing there and watching it and getting wet. It's awesome.
Mm. And have you got, Kingsley's touched on the fact that he's been out in the landscape and has managed to come back largely unscathed by the sounds of it. But what about you from a favourite perspective in terms of your favourite image this year, Will? Have you got one that leaps to mind, or are you just thinking your collective sky pictures are sort of all one of a piece?
It's actually, Raj, it's something I do anyway at the end of most years, is go through my files and pick between 10 and 12 pictures to print up and just have them up on my wall as kind of kind of reward myself and recognise what I've done in my year. So I haven't done that process yet because, of course, we're still going in this year, even though it's in the last knockings of December. But I will go through my 10 and 12. I did get some lovely skies I've just mentioned. I did have a trip to Iceland, and that was for the Nikon D780 when that was launched. So I got some landscapes there. But I think it's going to be basically self-portraits, a few water drops, and some sunsets, my top 12 this year. And I just hope I do better in 2021.
Which I'm sure you will. I mean, just from my own perspective, my favourite image is probably one of the first ones that I took when I first started taking a camera out. I mean, I've been quite pleased with my star trails. I've been quite pleased with some of the sunrises that I've got while I've been out walking the dog. But there was actually a shot that almost like confirms why you need to take a camera with you at all times. I went out with my wife, walked the dog, sort of early one evening in the summer. And this in the early summer actually, because the sun was setting behind us, and just sort of turned around, looked down a dusty track, and there was a tractor coming towards us, and dug the camera out. And as the tractor came closer and closer, it was beautifully backlit by the sunset. And I took that and sort of had a little play with it in Lightroom, and it ended up being something that I thought, I need to enter this into the actually country file competition. But of course I forgot. So I'll never know whether or not it was going to get a thumbs up from John Craven. But yeah, it kind of summed up, and I think that just moves on to, you know, what I take away from this year photographically is that thing about, I mean, you hear it so many times about always having a camera with you. And it is a different process for me. I've got my X100S, which I take with me all the time now. Before that, I took a phone, you know, with me and thought, well, if I see something, I'll take a picture with it. It's not the same. It is totally not the same. And so I definitely, you know, I very rarely leave the house now without a camera over my shoulder.
Just to confirm that, Raj, and something that relates to something I actually did today. Since lockdown, I haven't seen my mother. So that's over 6 months. I was allowed to visit today, but it's a window visit. So she's literally on the other side of the window, and I'm in the rain. And we're on the mobile. I was on the mobile phone, and she was on the inside on the phone as well. And I did exactly what you did. I took a camera with me. Didn't have my mobile. I took a Nikon with me, and I just stood there shooting through the window of her talking to me. Yeah. And I think when I go through my favourite 12 pictures of 2020, you know what? I think one of those is going to be in there.
It'll certainly sum the year up for sure, won't it?
Absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. What about you, Kingsley? Have you got any main takeaways for this year?
I think I'd probably go back to that idea of doing the act of doing, getting off your backside, and not worrying too much about you know, the minutiae of technique and gear and stuff, but realizing that being present and in the moment is the kind of is ultimately the best way to get pictures. But I mean, there was an interesting sort of technical discovery that I made as well, which was to do with, I quite often take pictures of the Burr Island Hotel in Devon, because it's right near a place where my mum and dad live down there. And for years, I've been taking these pictures at low light and in other times of day, but particularly at low light. And there's always this kind of slightly annoying glow around the hotel, as it's like, you know, it's lit up, so it's great, and I want it to be lit up and everything. And for years I've been trying to work out, and I realized recently it's sea spray. So it's like the light being diffused by sea spray that is in front of the hotel, and sort of like that is just another aspect of being out there and doing stuff, is that you learn more about your environment. And it's things like, you know, going back to this idea of sort of using a long lens all the time, you begin to realize that you have to shoot at certain times of day, like if you want to get sharp pictures from a long way off. Otherwise, everything has got heat haze in it and things like that. So, like, I suppose, you know, I've started off there talking about saying the technical aspects aren't important, but like I think things like that, sort of almost like environmental aspects that you learn as you kind of go out and you do and you make pictures. I think that's something that I would take away from this year.
One of the other things I was going to mention as well was the danger of just getting into a rut in terms of how you approach subjects. And I think one of the things I noticed when I first started taking a camera out with me after I got my tractor picture, which I was very happy with, was the fact that all I was actually doing, I was taking the camera with her, slinging it over my shoulder, and then when I came to take pictures, I was doing pretty much exactly the same thing every time, which was aperture priority, auto ISO, stick the subject on the rule of thirds, and I just found myself just doing. I've almost got that is my default sort of photography approach, and I sort of realised that, that is in a way, I mean, it's quite inhibitive in terms of like what you end up creating. And so what I did to try and get around that is I shot everything square. I just set on the back of my camera, 1-to-1 ratio, shot everything square. I also quite like the idea of shoot everything in sort of just purely in black and white, which I'll definitely have a go at. But I don't know about whether you boys find the same sort of thing where you can just get yourself into just a rut, and you just sort of suddenly realize that actually you've spent the last 3 years photographing with with aperture priority. Is that something you find, Will, or is it just me?
I certainly the idea of giving that variety, Raj, and forcing yourself to do something either in square or 16:9 or shooting panoramas, wherever you want to do all the time. I recognise it normally when I'm out shooting a project, but it doesn't bother me in the same way. I'm quite happy sticking with what I know, because I'd much rather focus on the subject rather than the technical side of it if I'm doing something where I'm just working hard on a project. So every man for himself in that respect, Raj.
Absolutely. Kingsley?
I think that's sort of reminded me of something like the idea of composition and using different framing techniques. It's a bit of a fool's mission to try and fit everything into a 3x2 frame, because the scene that you observe and the one that you want to take, as you say, may not fit into that frame. And so, should you ignore it? No, well, you shouldn't. You should either shoot it as it is and then realize that, I think as Will was talking about last time about cropping stuff, and realizing that cropping things to different aspects is a great way of kind of bringing the best out of a scene. But yeah, also to sort of try and remember that a scene, doesn't necessarily fit into a particular kind of box. Like if you see a panoramic scene is just that, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, we'd love that's really interesting stuff, and we'd love to hear from you if you have what are your highs and lows photographically of 2020. You can either share with us on our social media streams, or the easier way to get in touch with us, I guess, is using our podcast email, which is podcast@photographynews.co.uk. You can also have a look at the website while we're off over Christmas, which is photographynews.co.uk. You'll see all the latest issues up there, and I believe, Will, that is also the place to vote in the PN Awards 2020. Is that right?
That is right, Raj. I mean, our awards, where we recognise great equipment and great service. The awards voting runs until 25th of January 2021. Go to the website to vote. It's free. You don't have to register. Vote in a category you're comfortable with if you're not certain about certain things. But there are over 40 categories, which includes all sorts of things like best mirrorless camera, best APS-C camera, but also if you like, the more fringe subjects like color monitor, color management device, and even best tripod. So if you get the chance, dear listener, please go to the website and vote for us. Thank you.
And when does the voting end, Will?
Just to say again, on the 25th of January 2021.
Marvellous. And if you also find yourself at a loose end over the Christmas period, then by all means write us a little review about the podcast. We'd love to get some more reviews. We did actually have our very first review written on Apple Podcasts. I'm not quite sure that the guy wrote it on the right podcast though, because he was very complimentary. He told us that our podcasts get better and better after each one, which was amazing. So thank you very much to somebody who calls himself Kotagashi, who put that review up on Apple Podcasts. We'd love to see some Apple Podcast reviews up, or on Spotify. We're also on YouTube, as well as obviously you can listen to this podcast through the Photography News website. So tell your friends about us, get some reviews up. We'd love to read them. So moving on, we've got a trio of questions, one sort of equipment question, I guess, and a couple of more fun questions for the end of the year. So let's first of all cover off the equipment question, which as this episode of the PM podcast is sponsored by MPB, we've got an MPB question, and it comes from a lady called Edith Part in Hemel Hempstead, and she says, I've decided to trade in my Pentax DSLR kit and move to mirrorless. I enjoy nature and wildlife photography, so I want to buy into a system that has a good range of lenses, but my initial requirements are for a body plus standard and telezooms, covering in a range of around 28 to 300. I'm open to switching brands, so we'll be interested to hear your recommendations with a budget around £2,000. Well, Edith, we put your question, as before, to a chap called Ian Howarth at MPB, and here's what he had to recommend for you.
Hi Edith, thank you very much for your inquiry. It was definitely challenging to try and come up with the best possible solution for your inquiry, but I think we've got it in the shape of a Sony Alpha system. Now, the first thing to mention when moving over to a mirrorless system is that the lens range is maybe not as comprehensive as maybe someone like Canon or Nikon and their DSLR systems, simply because the technology is a lot newer. However, I would say that Sony probably have the most comprehensive range of lenses, I would say. So with that being said, we'll firstly talk about the bodies that we have on offer here for you. So the first one is the Sony A7R II, which was Sony's, I would say, flagship camera in many ways, sporting a 42 megapixel body. So plenty of resolution there, giving you plenty of options to crop in, for example, should you not be able to get as close as you'd like. Now the downside to that body is that it maybe doesn't have the shooting speed of other bodies. This one topping out at 5 frames a second, which for many will be plenty, but for some other people, the requirements will be to have a faster handling a body, kind of maybe at 7 or 8 or maybe even 10. So there's a bit of a trade-off there in terms of quality and shooting speed. A Sony A7R II can be had for £1,129 in excellent condition. Now moving on to the other option would be to go for the Sony A7 III. It's a slightly newer camera by about 18 months approximately. And it trades off shooting speed for resolution, so it's basically the opposite of the A7R II. So the A7 III will do double the shooting speed at 10 frames a second, but it halves approximately the resolution at 24 megapixels. So there's a bit of a trade-off there. There's not much else, I would say. The colors are very, very similar in terms of the Sony color science, both really, really good. But yeah, just a couple of considerations to be had there. The Sony A7 III is a bit more expensive as it's a newer camera, so this one sells for £1,449 in excellent condition. Now moving on to lenses, there are a couple of options here for you. Now obviously, unlike Canon and Nikon, Sony doesn't have that kind of like mid-range from a price point of view, but big range in terms of its zoom range lenses as much as say Canon and Nikon would do in their DSLR ranges. But there are a few options here. So one of them is the Sony FE 70-300 4.5 to 5.6. That can be had for about £750, approximately £730 in excellent condition. A very good lens with plenty of range, and obviously you'd have to make up the wider end in another lens, or maybe even a prime if you don't necessarily need a zoom. But this one will cover, I would say, the largest portion of the range that you need, between 70 and 300. The other option would be to go for the Tamron 28-200. So that covers most of the range that you need. Again, this is a very good lens. Tamron makes very, very good lenses, third-party lenses for Sony. And this is a great lens, fairly lightweight as well, so it won't feel like you're carrying too much with you. And this one sells for £649 in excellent condition. So I would say this would be a great starter for you to actually start building your lens collection for your new system.
So some great advice there. I hope that was useful. We'll move on to the next question, which is, two Christmassy themed questions. So, gentlemen, Kingsley, I'll come to you first. And this is a very simple question from Pete, who sent this in on email. And he said, what would the team like to find in their Christmas stockings?
Well,
Kingsley, that's in Christmas stockings, not wearing them.
Yeah, well, we won't throw up our favourite ladies from the world of cinema and TV at this point. Then, I'm actually expecting to receive not as a gift to myself, Nikon Z7 II. So I will be very very much hoping to get that before Christmas. Although there is a bit of a wait for them at the moment.
So you've gone out and bought a new camera.
Yeah,
this is news. So explain it. So rather than buying anybody else a Christmas present, what you've actually done is gone out and bought yourself one.
Yeah, like what do they say? Charity begins at home, don't they?
So tell us why you've dropped some money on a Z7 Mark II.
Well, I liked the first one, but there were a few things about it that I wasn't that keen on. And when the replacement was announced, it kind of solved a lot of the problems. And I think that there are, I'm not saying that I'm going to give up my DSLRs completely, but in a lot of ways, I was sort of keen to experience with some of this stuff that a lot of people are talking about, the sort of mirrorless benefits, really. And obviously, I've seen a lot of them while testing cameras, but I've never actually owned a mirrorless camera. So, here's hoping that it's going to all go swimmingly.
And what are you doing lenses wise? Are you investing in the specific glass, or are you using an adapter?
I think that the one that I've bought comes with an adapter, but it also comes with the 24-70 f4, which is a really good sort of versatile lens, obviously. And I think with it, I have gone for a 50mm 1.8 and the 70-200 f2.8.
Excellent. Blimey. Well, that's a full house.
Very nice.
Even more reason why I'm not getting anyone anything else.
So what about you, Will? What have you asked Santa for Christmas?
Well, I'll tell you what, it's on my list. But this is certainly I'm not going to invest in, but I would love Santa to come along with it. And that'll be a Fujifilm GFX 100. I just love megapixel counts, and I have used that camera on several occasions. And if Santa has been generous, and I don't think I'm on anybody's naughty list, I would love to have that. But on a more practical level, I wouldn't mind having early in the year bought a Nikon Z7. I wouldn't mind a couple of lenses. One would be the new shift lens launched by Laowa. And it's a 15mm f4.5 shift lens, manual focus, obviously. And that's about 1,300 quid, a little bit less, I think. I like the idea of that. And I think we've also touched upon it in previous podcasts. I do like the idea of a super zoom, a 24mm to 200mm lens for my Nikon Z. That would be lovely. And if Santa came along with that, I'd be very, very happy indeed.
So a super zoom. Wow, that's quite something.
Well, it's taken a long time to think about it, Roger. It was during the lockdown when I was walking around, again, doing sunsets and stuff and clouds. The versatility of a wide angle to a telephoto in one lens, in one simple to carry package, just came across as something, very compelling for me. Well, what I was doing. So I'm going to get one, I think. Even if Santa doesn't deliver one, I'm going to get one.
Well, I have a confession to make. And that is after my lambasting of your super zoom love, Will, I actually, another thing which I did photograph this very recently was it was my granddaughter's first birthday a couple of days ago. And because we're in a childcare bubble, we were able to go down and see her. And I managed to borrow a camera, took a camera down there, a Fujifilm X Pro 3. And of course, what I did is I stuck a super zoom on it. I stuck their 18 to 135 mm lens on it. Took a few pictures while she was enjoying her presents and what have you, although that mainly involved just looking at them and not really knowing exactly what she had to do with them. Just a bit of bounce flash just to light it all up. And I have to admit, it's probably that lens, but the quality of the results is actually really, really impressive. And I did take a couple of primes with me, and I confess that they stayed in the bag, and the super zoom was the lens of choice. So I'm kind of getting on board with the super zoom thing, and I guess that leads on to kind of what I would like to find in a stopping. Definitely the the Fujifilm X100V wouldn't go amiss. It's a camera that I've got, an X100S. I'm very happy with it. The battery life isn't great on it, and I think that is a thing that a lot of users of that camera have always alluded to being a few issues with it. X100V would be right up my street, but I'm quite keen on getting back into an interchangeable lens camera. And so kind of pretty much any Fujifilm camera that will take interchangeable lenses would be right up my street. So I'm hoping, I don't think that's going to happen because I've asked for other things as well, but that's probably going to be an investment early in the new year for me when I look to get back onto the interchangeable lens wagon. So hopefully, Pete, that answers your question. A fairly broad one as well to finish on, chaps, which comes from Lizzie Post, who's in Kendal, and she says, what are the team's photographic plans for 2021? Well, as we've already discussed, probably not to take more pictures because it sounds like we've been taking a fair number of pictures already. But Will, what do you reckon? What are you planning to do in 2021?
Well, it's odd that that question appeared because I've just finished my editorial column for the next issue, which comes out in the middle of January. And that got me thinking about that as well, what my plans were for 2021. And I suppose there are two things. One is to complete projects that I've already got going. And the second thing is to learn new skills. So going back to the projects I've got going, it's been talked about on the podcast before, and I mentioned in my column previously, but I've got two projects which I'm quite deep into. One's about the piers of the UK. These are the seaside piers around the coasts of our country. So I've only got 4 left to do, and because of lockdown and all that sort of stuff of 2020, I haven't completed that project, so I'm close. And my other project I want to finish off is my Docklands Light Railway project in London. And again, I haven't been to the capital since, well, I don't think I've been to the capital this year thinking about it, because that project I just couldn't complete. So the 2 projects I'm going to finish are those 2 in 2021. And in terms of new skills, one thing I want to do, because I'm not very good at it and I haven't really explored it, is pushing that red button on my camera and exploring video a bit. Ooh. I bought the software. I spent a couple £300 on Final Cut Pro. And I thought I might try doing something creative with video. Well, actually, when I say creative, just doing something with it. Because, the camera manufacturers have provided us with, wonderful 4K, 8K, even though on the latest Canon. I should have a play. And it's something I've never done. I've never seen myself as let's say as a John Woo or a Ridley Scott. But maybe I should try and do something.
Good for you. Well, I look forward to seeing the results of the Chang video endeavour. What about you, Kingsley? Have you got any major plans for 2021?
Just before everything started, I had plans and had made contact with a few people about a project about sort of taking portraits of the various shop dogs that are in my local town. There are lots of shops that have a dog. Like there's the key cutter, he's got a cool dog. There's one of the florists got a cool dog. There's a dog that lives in the barber's. And I wanted to go around and do these nice kind of considered portraits of all these dogs and kind of like maybe just turn it into a little project, maybe, end up sending it off to the local magazine or something, but kind of in another aspect of that going out there and kind of getting involved in things and actually presenting yourself with things to shoot. And obviously that's kind of one of the big values of projects, isn't it? But I mean, aside from that, I think just that sort of general idea about using some of the gear that I've got that I haven't had enough use out of. And I have a drone that I very rarely use, and like that kind of chimes a little bit with Will's idea about video, because obviously you can shoot stills from a drone, but the last time I was in Devon, I kind of went, I had a wander and I sort of scoped out a load of places that I can do some video with this drone, sort of flying along certain rivers and coastlines and things like that.
Can you confirm, though, just to make sure that nobody gets blanketed in cloud, that the Star Stacker or the Star Tracker, is going to stay firmly in its box for the foreseeable, because we'd all like to go out and shoot some star trails?
I did write Star Tracker down as on the list of all the gear that I would like to try and get more use out of. But yeah, you're right. Perhaps I should just seal it in concrete and dump it in the North Sea somewhere.
Well, as for me, Lizzie, I mean, basically, my plan is definitely just to get out and shoot more, and I think that given what both the other chaps have mentioned, and it's actually something we're going to cover off in our first podcast in the new year, which is about shooting projects. I definitely want to give my my photography a little bit more purpose. And at the moment, it's quite limited in terms of when I shoot is largely when I go out walking the dog, unless I've got little special occasions as I did this week. So I'd like to try and make a little bit more time to actually get out without the dog and take some images, but also like to give myself a project which I can achieve, which I can run throughout the year, and have a go at that.
Have you got any particular projects in mind?
I have, but I'm not going to reveal them now. I'll tell you what it's definitely not going to be, though, is a few years ago, I shot a 365 project, which it took a little while for me to sort of muster up the courage to do it. And I started it on the 14th of January because I didn't want to be a bit too predictable and start it on January the 1st. I did see it all the way through. It was in a leap year. It was the year of the Olympics 2012. And so there was I did 366 days, and my God, that ended up being an absolute labour of love in the end. Largely because I wrote a blog post for every single day that I went out and shot, and I think that was part of the problem. But actually, it also forced me to do it because I got a number of people following me, and I didn't want to let them down. But yeah, I think that actually did more damage than good to my photography because I really did get to a point where I loathed going out trying to take a picture.
You'd need a year off after that, wouldn't you?
Yeah, you totally do. Well, hopefully there's some useful answers and some useful ideas for the coming year. As I've mentioned before, if you do have a question that you'd like to put to us, then please get in touch with us on podcast@photographynews.co.uk. We'd love to hear some questions from you. So, gentlemen, the last few minutes of the last podcast of 2020, we obviously can't finish without a Will's word of wisdom. So, Will, regale us with your knowledge for one final time, please.
Well, I'm going to keep it simple, Raj, because I've already kind of mentioned it earlier, and that is to, in this strangest of years and most challenging of years, to actually go back and look at what you've done and do something with the pictures that you have taken this year. You could make some prints. I mean, like I said, I often used to go back and print 10 or 12 pictures of my favourite shots. So I think as a pat on the back, I think our listeners should do exactly the same thing. Either do 10 or 12 pictures and print them up and say, hey, I did really well despite all the travails of 2020. Or use one of these book publishing services, like Seaweed or Photobooks or Blurb. Just make an album of 2020 of your favourite shots. Recognise yourself. Give yourself a hearty pat on the back in this, like I say, most challenging of years. I'm sure you got good pictures. It's been different, and we've all got different types of good pictures. But hey, let's do something with them.
Now, just before we started recording, Will, you were waving around a very impressive-looking tome which you had put together of your own work. Is that not the case?
That's right, and that was again during lockdown, and it was, even though this project is not finished, and it's a project I started a couple of years ago, and that's photographing Venice at night. And I did have a trip planned for this April, which obviously got canned, and I'm not sure when I will ever get back to Italy. But I thought, what the hell, I'll go through what I had. I pulled out 50 or 60 pictures, made them into nice black and whites, and I uploaded them and printed a book. So even though the project's not finished, I actually want to give myself a kind of a boost and actually look at it at the end of the year and go, hey, actually, I've got something going on. So, me offering this sort of advice is not just me saying things. It's like, I should do this sort of stuff myself, guys. So there are plenty of services around. It depends on what sort of paper you want, what sort of binding you want. I mean, I know a lot of people who just make their own books. They make their own photographic prints and get some bookbinding glue out and make their own. And fair play to them. I think you can look on YouTube for how to do things like that. So I might even do that as well, because I have got an Epson printer upstairs, and like Kingsley's kit, that has been underutilized this year. So maybe I should dust it down, make some prints, and then block bind all the pages together using special book glue.
Maybe to add a certain degree of finality to my 365 project or 366 project, I should print all the images in a book and then torch it, just to kind of, just so I can finally close that chapter of my photographic life. No, it's a great bit of advice, Will. The more printing, the better, definitely when it comes to images, and having something to look back on. In what's been a very, very strange year, something positive to look back on is undoubtedly a good thing. Well, that brings us to the end of this Photography News podcast. the 16th. We will be back for a 17th. There will be a bit of a delay between this one and the next one coming out just because of Christmas and New Year, and we've all got a little bit of time off. So, Kingsley, do you have any final Christmassy messages to pass on to our loyal listeners, or do you just want to get on?
Crack on. Yeah, I've got a wine delivery coming. No, apart from the fact that I obviously, as a sort of a modern pagan, not that I like the term, but I'm actually celebrating the solstice, not Christmas, and I'm going to do it probably by burning that star tracker.
And what about you, Will? Any messages for the loyal PN readership? Listenership?
Just basically season's greetings to everyone during this holiday season. Just look after yourselves, stay safe, and just enjoy life as we can right now. And then let's look forward to a wonderful 2021 when normality, hopefully, will return.
Absolutely. I'm sure, hopefully by this time next year, we will be looking forward to getting around a table with family and friends. So that just leaves me to say thanks very much for listening. Thanks very much for your support, and wishing you a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year with what you're ever doing. And amazing, really, that I managed to get through this entire podcast without mentioning the recent football results. So we'll see you in the new year.
Something else to burn.
Bye. This photography news podcast is sponsored by MPB. Enjoy contact-free doorstep pickups which are safe, convenient, fully insured and completely free of charge. Plus, with 250,000 customers and 5 stars on Trustpilot, you can trust them and sleep easy.